Reality feels solid to everyone. That's the starting point. Not mystical, not unusual, not a sign of awakening or confusion. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, the world presents itself as stable, consistent, and undeniably real. Objects have weight, time moves forward, emotions seem tied to events, decisions feel personal. This sense of solidity is so familiar that it rarely gets questioned. It feels like the most obvious thing in the world. And yet, if you pause for a moment, you might notice something quietly strange about that certainty. Not that reality feels unreal, but that it feels constructed in a very specific way. The same room can feel different on different days. The same conversation can land differently depending on your mood. The same event can feel heavy or light depending on how you meet it. Nothing about the external situation has changed, yet the experience of it has. This isn't unusual, it's universal. And it points to something most of us were never taught to notice. We're usually told that reality feels real because it simply is. Solid objects, fixed laws, an external world that exists independently of us. That explanation works well enough to get through daily life, but it doesn't actually explain the experience of living inside reality. It doesn't explain why the world can feel overwhelming at times or strangely muted at others. It doesn't explain why emotional moments seem to stretch time, while routine days blur together. It doesn't explain why meaning can appear and disappear without warning. These aren't edge cases. This is everyday life. What we rarely talk about is the role your nervous system plays in making reality feel the way it does. This is a basic requirement of being human. Reality, as it exists in its raw form, is far too vast, fast, and complex to be experienced directly. If everything arrived at once without filtering or structure, it would be unusable. There would be no sense of continuity, no identity, no story, no ability to function. So something has to intervene. Your nervous system constantly takes in far more information than you could ever consciously process and reduces it to a workable version of the world. It selects, organizes, and stabilizes experience. It turns change into continuity. It turns sensation into objects. It turns flow into time. This is not something you choose to do. It's happening automatically all the time for everyone. This is why reality feels solid. Not because it is fixed in some absolute sense, but because it is being stabilized moment by moment. The world you experience is the world as filtered through a system designed to keep things coherent. That coherence is what we call real. Without it, experience would fragment. With it, life becomes navigable. You don't notice this process most of the time because it's working exactly as intended. The problem is not that reality feels too solid. The problem is that we're rarely shown why it feels that way. So when cracks appear, when life feels heavier than expected, when meaning shifts, when certainty loosens, we assume something has gone wrong. We personalize it. We think something about us is unstable or broken, but what's actually happening is that the underlying structure is becoming visible. You don't need special insight to notice this. Everyone encounters it in small ways. Think about how attention changes experience. When you're deeply focused on something, the world narrows. When you're distracted, it widens. Think about how expectations shape outcomes. Think about how memory reshapes the past each time you revisit it. These are not philosophical abstractions. They're everyday examples of how experience is being actively shaped, not passively received. This shaping is what allows reality to feel personal. It's why events seem to matter. It's why choices feel consequential. It's why life feels emotionally charged instead of neutral. None of this requires belief. It requires only observation. The world doesn't just happen to you. It happens through a system that gives it form. This is where the deeper question begins to emerge. If reality feels solid because it is being actively shaped into something livable, what exactly is doing the shaping and what is being shaped from? These aren't questions you need to answer yet. They're questions that naturally arise once you stop assuming that solidity explains itself. This video isn't here to tell you that reality is fake, or that nothing matters, or that you should detach from your life. That would miss the point entirely. The goal is to understand why reality feels the way it does. why it feels structured, meaningful, and sometimes heavy, without turning that understanding into something destabilizing, because the truth is, this structure is not a trap, it's a function. Once you see that, the experience of living inside reality begins to change. The weight starts to make sense, the intensity becomes intelligible, and instead of feeling at the mercy of something solid and immovable, you begin to recognize the process that's been quietly supporting your experience all along. And this is only the first layer, because once we understand why reality feels solid for everyone, we can begin to explore what that solidity is made of and what happens when you stop mistaking the structure for the source. Now that we've named the fact that reality feels solid for everyone, the next step is understanding how that solidity is created. The experience you call reality is not arriving fully formed. It's being assembled quietly, constantly, and efficiently by a system whose job is livability. At any given moment, there is far more information available than you could ever consciously experience. Light, sound, movement, memory, expectation, emotion, possibility. If all of it reached you at once, there would be no clear world, only noise. So the system that keeps you oriented does something essential. It reduces, it simplifies, it prioritizes, it compresses experience into a form that can be handled. This is not something unique to you. It's not a special state or an altered perception. It's the default condition of being human. Every person you've ever met is living inside a version of reality that has been filtered, organized, and stabilized in this way. The reason it feels so convincing is because it's meant to be. A world that constantly reminded you of its construction would be impossible to live in. You can see evidence of this compression everywhere once you know what to look for. Consider how attention works. When you focus on one thing, everything else fades into the background because it's no longer useful to the moment you're in. Or consider how quickly you recognize objects. You don't analyze shapes and colors consciously. You see a chair and simply know it's a chair. That recognition is the result of a massive amount of simplification happening beneath awareness. Time works the same way. You experience it as a steady flow moving from past to future in a straight line. But your actual experience of time changes constantly. Hours pass quickly when you're engaged and slowly when you're bored. Entire years can feel compressed into a single memory, while a few seconds can feel stretched. The system smooths these fluctuations into something that feels continuous, because continuity is what allows identity and meaning to form. This is what we mean by compression. Reality, as you experience it, is not raw existence, it's existence shaped into a usable form. The system doing this shaping doesn't ask philosophical questions. It doesn't wonder about the nature of consciousness or the structure of the universe. Its concern is practical. Can this experience be navigated? Can it be survived? Can it be remembered? That's why reality feels personal. Not because it revolves around you, but because it is organized around your capacity to engage with it. Events don't just happen, they happen in relation to your expectations, your memories, and your current state. This isn't a failure of objectivity, it's a requirement for experience. Without it, nothing would register as meaningful at all. What's important to understand here is that compression doesn't mean distortion in the way we usually think of it. It doesn't mean something is wrong or deceptive, it means something is being translated. Just as a map, your experience of reality is not the whole of what exists, but it's enough to live inside. And that's the point. The problem begins when we forget that this translation is happening, when we assume that the version of reality we experience is the source itself, rather than a representation. That's when solidity turns into rigidity. That's when intensity turns into pressure. That's when life starts to feel heavier than it needs to be. You've likely noticed this in moments of stress or uncertainty. The world feels tighter, options seem fewer, the future feels fixed. Nothing about reality itself has suddenly hardened. What's changed is the level of compression. The system narrows its focus in response to perceived demand. It prioritizes control and predictability. Again, this is not personal, it's functional. The same thing happens in moments of ease. The world feels more open, possibilities appear, time feels less urgent, the system relaxes its grip. It allows more information through. Reality doesn't become less real, it becomes less constrained. These shifts happen to everyone, whether they name them or not. Understanding this reframes something fundamental. The heaviness people feel in life is often assumed to come from external circumstances. And while circumstances matter, they don't fully explain the experience. Much of that weight comes from how tightly experience is being compressed. How much has to be managed? How much needs to be held together to maintain coherence? This is why reality can feel emotionally heavy even when nothing is wrong. Maintaining a stable, continuous world takes effort. Maintaining a stable sense of self takes effort. Holding memory, expectation, and meaning in alignment takes effort. The system does this seamlessly, but that doesn't mean it's effortless. None of this means that reality is an illusion or that your experiences don't matter. Quite the opposite. The fact that experience is structured this carefully tells us that it matters deeply. It matters enough to be shaped into something you can actually live inside. The solidity you feel is not a trick, it's a support structure. And yet, once you see this structure, something subtle begins to change. You stop taking the feeling of heaviness as proof that reality is fixed or unchangeable. You begin to recognize it as a sign of how much is being compressed into the present moment. That recognition doesn't remove difficulty, but it adds clarity. And clarity changes how weight is carried. This brings us to the edge of the next question. If reality feels solid because experience is being compressed into a livable form, what exactly is being compressed? What is the raw material underneath this structure? We don't need to answer that yet, but we're close enough now to feel the shape of the question forming. Because once you understand the system that makes reality livable, it becomes impossible not to wonder what reality would feel like without it, and what remains constant beneath all that shaping. And this is where the conversation begins to deepen. At this point, it's natural for a deeper question to arise. If reality feels solid because experience is being compressed into something livable, then what exactly is being compressed? What is the raw material beneath the structure you move through every day? This question doesn't come from curiosity alone, it comes from recognition. Because once you see that solidity is created, not assumed, you begin to sense that something more fundamental is present underneath it. Before there was a world of objects, roles, timelines, and meanings, there was experience itself, awareness without labels, possibility without form. This isn't a mystical claim or an abstract belief. It's something you can notice in simple moments, like when you pause between thoughts or when attention briefly loosens its grip on what it's focused on. For a fraction of a second, there is stillness without content. That stillness doesn't feel empty. It feels open. That openness is what gets shaped into experience, gradually, continuously, and in a way that allows it to be known. The system we've been talking about doesn't create reality from nothing. It gives form to something already present. It turns openness into structure. It turns possibility into events. It turns awareness into a world. This is why reality doesn't feel neutral. It feels meaningful. It feels charged. It feels like something is happening rather than nothing at all. Meaning is not added afterward. It emerges as part of the compression itself. When experience is shaped into time, memory, and identity, significance appears automatically. Without this shaping, nothing would stand out. Everything would be equally present and therefore unusable. This helps explain something most people struggle to articulate: the sense that life feels intentional even when it's confusing, that events seem to carry weight beyond their surface details, that moments linger, that certain experiences feel like turning points while others fade quickly. This isn't because reality is scripted in advance, it's because experience is being organized in a way that allows pattern and continuity to form. Continuity is essential. Without it, there would be no sense of a self moving through time, no way to learn, no way to remember, no way to care. The compression of experience creates a thread that links moments together. That thread is what you recognize as my life. It's not an illusion, but it is a construction, and constructions can feel very real when they're functioning properly. This is where people often get lost. When they hear that experience is constructed, they assume it means experience is false. But construction doesn't mean deception, it means translation. It means that something vast is being rendered into something specific. A language is being formed so that experience can be communicated, remembered, and navigated. You already accept this idea in simpler forms. A photograph is not the event it captures, but it still carries meaning. A word is not the thing it points to, but it allows understanding. In the same way, the reality you experience is not the totality of what exists, but it is a coherent expression of it. It's how something infinite becomes knowable. This is why the world feels so stable most of the time. Stability is not accidental, it's necessary. A constantly shifting, unstructured experience would offer no foothold. Nothing to respond to, nothing to relate to. So experience settles into patterns, objects appear consistent, time appears linear, identity appears continuous. These patterns are not mistakes, they're the conditions that make experience possible at all. And yet those patterns are not fixed in the way we often assume. They are maintained, reinforced, adjusted. This is why change can feel disorienting. When familiar structures loosen, the system has to reorganize. New patterns form, old ones dissolve. The sense of solidity wavers, not because reality is breaking, but because it's being reconfigured. Everyone encounters this at some point, during major life transitions, during loss or growth, during moments when old assumptions no longer hold. The world feels unfamiliar, even if nothing outwardly has changed. That unfamiliarity is not a sign that you've lost your way. It's a sign that the underlying compression is shifting to accommodate new experience. What's important to notice here is that beneath all of this shaping, something remains constant. Awareness itself does not change. The content of experience changes endlessly, but the capacity to experience does not. It's present whether the moment feels heavy or light, clear or confusing. It's present before you name anything and after the naming fades. This is not something you need to believe. It's something you can verify quietly. Right now, as you read these words, awareness is present. It doesn't need effort. It doesn't need instruction. It's simply there, allowing the experience of reading to happen. Thoughts move through it. Meanings arise, attention shifts, but awareness itself remains unchanged by any of it. This is what is being compressed into experience. Reality, as you know it, is awareness taking form. And that form has rules, patterns, and constraints because without them, experience would dissolve back into formlessness. Understanding this changes how you relate to solidity. The world doesn't feel real because it's separate from you. It feels real because it's arising within the same field of awareness that you are using to notice it. The boundary between inner and outer is not as rigid as it appears. It's part of the structure, not the foundation. This doesn't mean the world disappears when you stop thinking about it. It means that the experience of the world is inseparable from the awareness in which it appears. That awareness is not personal in the way identity is personal. It doesn't belong to your name or your history. It's more basic than that. It's the shared ground that makes any experience possible. Once this is seen, even faintly, the feeling of density begins to make more sense. Reality feels heavy because awareness is being held in form, focused, localized, directed. That holding creates tension, just as holding any shape does, but it also creates meaning. Without that tension, there would be no story, no connection, no life as you know it. This is where many people try to jump too far ahead. They want to escape the structure, to dissolve the form, to return to openness permanently, but that misses the point. The structure exists for a reason. Experience exists for a reason. The goal is not to undo it, but to understand it well enough to move within it without mistaking it for the whole. And this brings us to a subtle but important shift. When you stop seeing solidity as proof of finality, it becomes a process instead of a prison. The world doesn't lose its weight, but the weight becomes intelligible. You can feel it without being overwhelmed by it. You can engage with it without feeling trapped inside it. We're now close to a turning point in the conversation. because once you understand what reality is made from and why it takes the form it does, the question naturally becomes personal. Where do you fit in this process? What role do you play in the shaping of experience? And what changes when you stop identifying only with the structure and start recognizing the awareness beneath it? Up to this point, we've been looking at reality from a wide angle, how it feels solid for everyone, how that solidity is created through compression, how awareness takes form so experience can exist at all. Now the conversation naturally turns inward, because once you understand how reality is shaped, it becomes impossible not to ask where you fit into that shaping. The most common assumption is that reality happens first, and you respond to it second. An event occurs, and then you think about it, feel something about it, and react. This feels obvious because it's how experience presents itself. But when you look more closely, you start to notice that your response is not added on afterward. It is part of the experience itself. The meaning, the emotional tone, the sense of importance or threat all arise together. There is no clean separation between what happens and how it is lived. This doesn't mean you are consciously creating events or controlling outcomes. That idea creates unnecessary pressure and confusion. What it means is simpler and more grounded. You participate in the shaping of experience by the way your system organizes information. Attention, expectation, memory, and interpretation are not passive layers. They are active components of what feels real. Consider something familiar. Two people can live through the same period of time and come away with completely different memories of it. Not because one is right and the other is wrong, but because different aspects of the same experience were emphasized, repeated, and reinforced. Over time, those emphases become the reality that is remembered. The world didn't change, the structure of experience did. This is about function. The system that compresses experience doesn't aim for accuracy in some absolute sense. It aims for coherence. It selects what fits the existing structure and reinforces it. That structure is what allows you to feel like the same person from one day to the next. Without it, identity would dissolve into fragments. Identity itself is part of this shaping as a stabilizing pattern. Your name, your history, your roles, your preferences all act as reference points. They tell the system what matters, what to highlight, what to ignore. This is why identity feels so solid. It's constantly being used to organize experience. It's not just a story you tell yourself, it's a tool the system relies on. This is where reality begins to feel personal, because it is filtered through a structure that has learned what to prioritize. Over time, certain themes repeat. Certain emotions arise more easily. Certain interpretations become default. The world starts to feel consistent in a very specific way. That consistency is comforting, but it can also feel limiting when it hardens. When people say they feel stuck in life, they're often responding to this hardening. The same patterns appear again and again, the same reactions, the same conclusions. Nothing feels open. It's tempting to think the problem lies entirely in external circumstances, and sometimes it does. But very often, the deeper issue is that the structure organizing experience has become too narrow to accommodate change. This narrowing is what happens when a system prioritizes stability, but stability has a cost. The more tightly experience is organized, the heavier it can feel. The future appears more predictable, but also more constrained. Possibility shrinks, meaning becomes repetitive. Life starts to feel like something you move through rather than participate in. What's important to see here is that this is not permanent. The structure that shapes experience is not fixed. It's adaptive. It changes gradually, often without notice, in response to new information, new perspectives, and new ways of relating to what's happening. The difficulty is that most of this adaptation happens below conscious awareness, so when change begins, it can feel disorienting before it feels liberating. You've likely experienced moments where your understanding of something shifted and suddenly everything related to it felt different. A conversation reframed a memory. An insight changed how you saw a relationship. A realization altered how you interpreted the past. The events themselves didn't move, but their meaning did. That change in meaning changed your experience of reality. This is the natural result of how experience is structured. Meaning is not attached to events like a label. It emerges from how events are integrated into the larger pattern. When the pattern shifts, meaning shifts with it. This is where many misunderstandings arise. People hear that experience is shaped and assume they should try to control it, to force positivity, to override discomfort, to constantly adjust their inner state. But that approach misunderstands the process. Shaping happens through attention and understanding, not force. The system responds to clarity, not pressure. Clarity doesn't mean certainty, it means seeing what's happening without immediately collapsing it into a familiar story. When you allow experience to register without rushing to define it, the structure has room to adjust. It can update, it can reorganize. This is how new patterns form without chaos. At this level, the role you play is subtle. You are not directing the system like a commander. You are influencing it by how you relate to experience as it unfolds. Whether you meet it with rigidity or openness, whether you insist on immediate conclusions or allow ambiguity. These choices may seem small, but they shape the long-term texture of reality as you live it. This is why awareness matters so much, not as a spiritual achievement, but as a functional capacity. Awareness allows experience to be felt before it is finalized. It creates a pause in which new organization becomes possible. Without that pause, the system defaults to what it already knows. Nothing about this requires you to become someone else or live differently overnight. It doesn't demand constant introspection or emotional analysis. It simply asks that you notice how quickly experience solidifies into meaning and how that meaning then feeds back into what feels real. Once you notice that loop, you can't entirely unsee it. And this is where the conversation quietly shifts. Because once you see that you are not just inside reality, but participating in how it takes shape, the sense of being a passive observer starts to loosen. You're still living in the same world, dealing with the same circumstances. But the relationship changes. Reality feels less like a fixed container and more like a dynamic process you are moving within. This doesn't remove difficulty, it doesn't guarantee ease, but it changes the quality of engagement. The weight you feel no longer comes from believing everything is final. It comes from recognizing that structure is active and responsive, even when it feels slow or resistant. We're now approaching the point where this understanding becomes practical. Because once you see the role you play in shaping experience, the question becomes lived. How do you move through reality differently when you stop mistaking the structure for the source? How do you carry the weight without letting it define you? By now, something important has shifted in how this conversation feels. You've seen that solidity is not an enemy and not a mistake. It's a function, a structure that allows experience to exist at all. And once that is understood, the question is no longer about breaking free from reality, but about learning how to live inside it without being completely shaped by it. Most of the tension people feel in life comes from mistaking structure for identity. The roles you occupy, the patterns you repeat, the stories that seem to define you begin to feel like who you are rather than how experience is currently organized. When that happens, any challenge to the structure feels personal. Change feels threatening. Uncertainty feels destabilizing. Structure is not identity. Structure is how experience is held together in time. Identity is simply the most familiar structure you have. It's the reference point your system uses to maintain continuity. And that's why it feels so convincing. It's not imaginary, it's functional, but it's also not final. Living inside structure without being defined by it doesn't require rejecting your life or stepping away from responsibility. It doesn't mean dissolving your sense of self or abandoning meaning. It means recognizing that structure can be engaged with lightly, even while it remains present. You can participate fully without collapsing into it. You already know what this feels like in small ways. Think of moments when you were deeply involved in something, but not consumed by it. When effort was present, but strain wasn't. When you cared, but weren't gripping. Those moments didn't happen because reality disappeared. They happened because your relationship to structure softened. You were inside the experience without being trapped by it. This is the practical implication of everything we've been exploring. When you stop assuming that the solidity of reality defines you, the weight begins to redistribute. The same circumstances can still demand effort. The same challenges can still arise, but they no longer carry the added burden of identity threat. They become situations to move through, not verdicts on who you are. This doesn't happen through positive thinking or mental reframing. It happens through understanding. Once you see how experience is organized, you stop fighting the organization itself. You stop expecting reality to feel light when its very function is to hold form. Instead, you learn how to move with the structure rather than against it. One of the simplest shifts is in how you meet moments of tension. Instead of immediately asking, "What does this say about me?" the question becomes, "What is being asked to reorganize here?" That shift alone creates space. It turns pressure into information. It allows experience to update instead of hardening. This is especially important during periods of change. When old patterns no longer fit, the system often tightens before it adapts. Reality can feel heavier during these times because the structure is under revision. Recognizing this prevents unnecessary self-judgment. It allows patience where there would otherwise be resistance. Living this way doesn't mean detaching from emotion. Emotions are part of the structure too. They signal what matters. They indicate where attention is being drawn. The difference is that emotions are no longer treated as absolute truths about reality. They're treated as movements within experience, meaningful but not defining. Over time, this changes how you experience meaning itself. Meaning stops feeling like something you must extract or protect. It begins to feel like something that emerges naturally as experience is integrated. You don't have to force significance. It appears when structure and awareness are in balance, and this balance is not static. It shifts depending on context. Some moments require tight structure, others allow openness. There is no ideal state to maintain. The mistake is thinking that one mode should apply to all of life. Reality becomes heavy when the system forgets how to vary. What you're learning here is not how to escape density, but how to relate to it intelligently. Density is what allows experience to be lived. Without it, there would be nothing to engage with. But density does not need to be resisted or glorified, it needs to be understood. As this understanding settles, a subtle confidence begins to emerge. Not the confidence of control, but the confidence of orientation. You know where you are. You know what structure is doing. You stop taking every fluctuation as a personal failure or cosmic signal. Life becomes less dramatic, but more coherent. This is also where a quiet freedom appears. When you no longer assume that the current structure defines what's possible, the future opens slightly. Not in a way that guarantees outcomes, but in a way that allows movement. You stop bracing against reality and start participating in it. And participation is the key word. You are not outside the process, observing it from a distance. You are inside it, contributing to how experience organizes itself over time. That contribution doesn't require effort. It happens through attention, understanding, and the willingness to let structure update when it needs to. None of this removes responsibility. It changes how responsibility is carried. You're still making choices. You're still engaged with consequences. But those choices are no longer made under the assumption that everything is fixed and final. They're made with the awareness that experience is responsive, even if slowly. Now, how the original question has evolved. We began by asking why reality feels solid and heavy. We moved through how that solidity is created, what it's made from, and the role you play in shaping it. Now we arrive at a quieter realization. The weight you feel is not proof that life is against you, it's evidence that experience is being held in form. And when you understand that, the weight becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it. You're still inside reality, but you're no longer defined by its structure alone. There's one final step left, because understanding this intellectually is not the same as letting it change how you live. We can now return to where we began, but from a different place. At the start of this conversation, reality felt solid simply because it always has. Fixed, given. something you moved through rather than something that moved with you. Now, after tracing how experience is shaped, held, and stabilized, that solidity hasn't disappeared, but it no longer needs to feel absolute. It feels intelligible, and that understanding changes how you stand inside it. Reality still has weight. Days still demand effort. Emotions still rise and fall. Time still moves forward. Nothing about being human has been bypassed or transcended here. What has changed is the relationship. The sense that solidity means finality begins to loosen. The feeling that every moment defines you permanently starts to soften. You're still inside the structure, but you're no longer mistaking it for the source of who you are. This is the quiet shift most people never name. They either try to escape reality or resign themselves to it. But there is a third position, or one where you recognize that structure exists for experience to happen, not to imprison it. When you live from that recognition, reality doesn't lose its seriousness, but it gains flexibility. The pressure you once felt doesn't vanish, but it redistributes. It becomes something you can move with rather than brace against. You begin to notice this in small, ordinary ways. Moments that once felt overwhelming no longer close in as quickly. Uncertainty feels less like a threat and more like a signal that reorganization is underway. Even difficulty starts to carry information instead of judgment. Life remains complex, but it stops feeling hostile. You are no longer collapsing your entire sense of self into the current structure. This is what it means to live inside reality without being consumed by it. You allow experience to be real without demanding that it be permanent. You allow meaning to arise without needing it to be fixed. You participate fully, but you don't grip. And over time, that changes the texture of living. Nothing here requires constant awareness or vigilance. You don't need to monitor your thoughts or manage your state. The system continues to do what it has always done. What's different is that you understand it. And understanding removes unnecessary struggle. You stop arguing with how experience works. You stop asking reality to feel lighter than it's designed to feel. Instead, you learn how to carry it wisely. This wisdom doesn't announce itself. It shows up as steadiness, as the ability to stay present without over-identifying, as the capacity to let moments pass without needing them to confirm or threaten who you are. You're still affected by life, but you're not reduced by it. The structure holds, but it no longer holds you hostage. And now we arrive at the point where insight turns into integration. The way reality feels right now is slightly different than when you began. This is the activation threshold, the moment where understanding becomes orientation, where the version of you who started this video gives way to the version who can now move through reality with a little more space, a little more clarity, a little less resistance. You don't need to do anything with this moment. You only need to acknowledge that it's happening. If you want to anchor this shift, not for me, but for yourself, there is a simple way to do it. Naming something clarifies it. Declaring something gives it shape. Write this in the comments to anchor this shift. I live inside reality without being defined by it. Only write it if it resonates, because it reflects something you're already beginning to feel. This declaration isn't a promise about the future. It's a statement about how you're relating to the present. And now we can close this conversation. Where it belongs, you are still here. Still inside the same world, still moving through the same structures. But something essential has been reoriented. Reality no longer needs to feel like a weight you endure. It can be something you carry with understanding. The world remains solid, experience remains real, and you remain part of it. But now, you know why it feels the way it does. And that knowing stays with you quietly as you move forward. Inside reality, but not contained by it.